Joining us on TheInformer as a special guest, someone I saw play football 100 years ago now, and he was a star for Essendon, he was a star for Hawthorn, and he continues to star and find ways to create enormous success, both for himself and also for the people he associates himself with. His name is Paul Salmon, and he joins us on TheInformer. Welcome, mate.
Yeah, thanks, George. Lovely to be with you. And although that was a rather cheap shot, the 100 years reference, I'm kind of flattered. So thank you.
Well, it's more a case of I can remember football and grand finals when they actually had close to 100,000 people, and when people cried and people laughed and enjoyed themselves on what is normally a most magnificent day in Australian sport, not just Victorian sport. And it was an enormous time. The first time I saw you was at the G. It was the game against Collingwood 100 years ago, as I said, 1990. And it was the day that I watched grown men from both sides, and women for that matter, from both clubs, cry. On one side, they cried because they couldn't believe they'd lost, and the others cried because they couldn't believe they'd won. But at the start of that contest, I sat there, and the late Max Walker had said to me, just watch and see how impactful Paul Salmon is. And my God, in that first 20 minutes, 4 magnificent marks. Had you kicked straight, the game would have been over. But as we discovered a number of years later in 1998, when the great Wayne Carey in North Melbourne didn't kick straight, they lost to Adelaide, that came back in the second half and played some terrific football. But I'm digressing. You've moved on, you've been a magnificent success for 2 wonderful clubs, and you haven't stopped learning, you haven't stopped improving, and you've actually moved into the education space, and now you're moving into the IT education space, and mental health seems to be right in the middle of your crosshairs. Tell me about it.
Thanks, George. I must admit, I came on to join you today feeling really good about myself, and then you brought up Collingwood 1990 and that debacle. So I might need good therapy after this myself, to be honest. Look, it's been an exciting journey. My football career was extremely fulfilling, and although, like any career, it has its ups and downs, that grand final was both a huge down, but also to see the unbridled joy from the Collingwood players who deserved their win on the day. We went up to it, but I was fortunate to play in some winning grand finals too. So swings and roundabouts, but a very lucky man. And yeah, post football, I've enjoyed an entrepreneurial journey through various guises, I suppose you could say. But over the last few years, I've pursued a passion of mine, and the passion stems from some personal experience. Family members that struggled through their school journey, their education journey, with anxiety, borderline depression, and other issues that made school very challenging. So I suppose I was one of arguably millions of parents around the world that would drop their children at school or a child at school and wonder if they've done the right thing, because what they're walking into is going to be extremely challenging. In what condition would they come home? How would that manifest? So to cut a long story short, I did develop a product to allow those children in school to connect their emotional engagement within the classroom environment. We use data from that environment to overlap with those mood inputs. We started to get a really interesting picture on what affects their mood, what impacts it. We started to understand how we can get really good data around early intervention, because there's a wonderful quote from Desmond Tutu, and it's something to the effect of, it's time we stopped pulling bodies out of the river and went upstream to find out why they're falling in. So with that as a backdrop, I've used that as a kind of a platform to build out this solution on the eve, I suppose, if 3 months is on the eve of taking it to the broader market. I think we're going to have some interesting challenges off the back of COVID-19 around the displaced workforce and how we monitor the mood of our employees and our workforce better, how we can intervene much earlier in any concerning cases. But I think companies and I think people by and large around the world are going to want to connect with themselves at a deeper level. And I don't mean that to sound overwhelming, because I think what we can do is make mental health as normal as your physical health. Looking after how many steps you take every day, how you sleep. So that's the space. Without rambling on, it's kind of an exciting area to work in because it hasn't been overly explored yet. And to normalize mood is a challenging concept. So not afraid of a challenge, George. So I'm giving it a nice shot, and hopefully in a few months' time I can come back on and tell you a lot more about it.
Paul Salmon, the thing that fascinates me when you talk about mental health, we have such a stigma that surrounds it. We need to change that conversation, or indeed start a conversation. There, as you touched on, we're in the midst of a COVID pandemic. Much of Australia has seemed to learn to live with COVID. Victoria, unfortunately, has had a massive scare and is currently in lockdown, which is causing enormous grief. And you can see, depending on where you are and what you're doing, I saw an interview last night with Mr. Harvey from Harvey Norman, and he was buoyant because his shops and his business is doing better than it's ever done. And I'm sitting there thinking, wow, in the midst of all this angst, in the midst of all this pain, here's a man feeling top of the world. So for me, mental health can be your state of mind, your state of life, your state of fitness, and you see our mood swings a bit like football. You can start magnificently the day, something impacts on it, and your mood changes. So what this device, I think, or this program that you're introducing or likely to introduce, is a way of monitoring your mood and staying on top of it?
Yeah, look, I think you make a really good point because mood is a very natural, very normal thing, and we don't want to always address it in a negative context. And I must emphasize, I'm no expert. I'm just learning so much along the way with the experts I work with. And a natural rhythm of a mood is sort of up and down. It's not always up or always down, always flat. We have to accept that it fluctuates, and we also have to acknowledge that there's a number of different things that influence mood, whether it be biological elements, the hormones, psychological, so learned experiences, for example. But the environment has a big a role to play in our mood. So whether that's weather patterns, whether it's been locked up inside for long periods of time. So it's your activity levels or lack of activity, it's your sleep, it's your screen time. So there's lots of things that can impact, but I think it's important that we also reinforce positive behaviours that impact your mood in a good way. So my solution is about providing those insights, providing the information off the back of really good data that will enable you to better understand yourself, but also enable your employers to get more immediate feedback on the pulse of their workforce. And I think the obligation going forward is going to be quite significant to monitor that better. And look, there's some wonderful technologies out there today, amazing resources out there today from groups that provide programs around mental health. We know them; they're all well known to us, from Beyond Blue to Lifeline to Headspace. But they do amazing work in providing resources in that end. But I'm talking about the vast majority of the population that I'm hoping we can take on a journey that helps them embrace this side of them, this emotional context, if you like, and learn more about it and have some fun with it. Because I think my philosophy is that we can engage in a very natural, fun way to make it mean something. So yeah, it's an interesting journey. I must admit, I started this 3.5 years ago and ran all my initial pilots in the education system because the scary statistic, one of many, I mean, obviously we know suicide rates are going up, and we know that mental health rates of diagnosed conditions is going up, and we know some of the factors that sit around that. But over half of mental health conditions emerge before the age of 14. So with that in mind, what are we doing in schools to equip our youth, the next generation, to be prepared for what's coming, and to actually be able to connect with themselves as much as they connect with external people of influence? So anyway, it's well on its way. I'm unashamedly excited about what we're developing here, and I know I'm not dropping any brand names or anything yet because it's a smidge early for us, but in the not too distant future I hope to be able to share with the world something that's going to have an impact. Yeah.
Paul Salmon, just listening to you take us through how this idea has taken form and how it's encouraged you to continue on this journey of discovery, I'm reminded that you have lived in an incredibly rich life in the football world with some of the smartest thinkers, some of the best coaches that have ever played the game, and coached men, young men, especially in their tentative early years when they're still trying to work out who they are, and then champions. Yeah, and I'm sure that you've brought or bringing some of that wisdom. I've always been a great believer that attitude is key to so many things, but I'm also reminded as a father just how difficult the journey is when we send our children to school and without realising it, they're bullied almost to the point of, I don't want to say death, but some children have been terribly traumatised. And I can remember my daughter telling me that she was having a horrific time. And I wish I had been smart enough to step in earlier to cut it off and to ask the school for assistance. Will you be working, and will some of this research help us maybe get in and not act as an interventionist, but see the trouble brewing and get in earlier and help the most precious ingredient we have, and that's our next generation of children?
Yeah, look, another really good point. We've got a generation, and it doesn't matter what generation we're talking about. Young people don't have the emotional intelligence, the emotional maturity to be able to convey how they're feeling on a regular basis to people of influence, whether that be a teacher or a parent. There's lots of complexity around that, and we've too often made assumptions around anxiety and what it might be linked to, around happiness and what that might be linked to. It's interesting, just a couple of very quick examples from our early pilots. We had, students in the US, one in particular, because we're about patterns over time. This is not about saying a mood input tells us a big story, but a number of them over a period of time, over a period of weeks, starts to tell us a story which we can interpret in a certain way, that there are impacts on these outcomes. So what I'm talking about is a student that presses anxious in our device over a period of about 8 times, about 4 weeks, but we can identify that that's linked to lunchtime. So what that information gives the teacher is an opportunity to observe and to see what is impacting that student's anxiety. So that's something that's very discreet, it's very private, and it's very natural. And we need to creating this physical bridge between well-being and the digital world was an interesting exercise. And then we had, on the other end of the extreme, was a young lady that pressed, and there's many examples, but the one that sticks in my mind is she pressed happy 32 times in this 4-week period, but she pressed bored 28 times. So we've got a student there that loves being at school, but she's asking for greater engagement, and she was able to use this digital platform to ask that. And I think it's really powerful from both ends of the spectrum, and that's what we've got to explore in a football club sense, mate. Because I arrived at Essendon at 15, and I left Essendon again after a period at Hawthorn, but I left Essendon at 37. I had 23 pre-seasons in my career, and because even as a 15-year-old, I joined the senior program, and you get to witness, not only get to witness your own response to the demands of the sport. And they evolved quite dramatically in that period in my career. But you look at players and teammates and observe their own journeys, both from a physical and a mental standpoint. And it's challenging. It's a brutal world. Professional sport, and particularly a contact sport like ours, can take you and seduce you into thinking that you're in the right place, you've got all the support you need, and that you'll be okay. And there's that macho element to it. But I just want to share a quick anecdote with you. I was only 17, nearly 18. It was before I kind of came on the scene in a big way from a goal kicking perspective. And I was catching a taxi to and from Essendon with a young guy, my own age, and he was also playing under 19s and reserves. He was everything I envied. He was attractive. He was a handsome man, and I've been gifted with this, unfortunately. But he was good looking. He was 6'4". He was athletic. He was so talented, and we had such good dialogue in the taxi. I thought the world of him. We didn't socialise at all because he lived in Doncaster and I lived in Ringwood, and we're just taxi mates and footy mates. It was kind of a separation. Anyway, long story short, he tragically took his life at the end of that year. I didn't see any signs. We never talked about how we were emotionally dealing with our journey at the footy club. And I'm not a counsellor. I was never going to be able to help probably, but it really scared me that I didn't see it coming. And very rarely do we see these issues manifest in such an obvious way. And it rocked me. It rattled me. I devoted my next period of time, my next summer of development to him. I couldn't get him out of my brain. It was all about doing it for him because I thought it was a waste as well. I just was. One part of me was sad and for the loss, but the other part of me was angry for what he was missing out on, and it was conflicting emotions. Anyway, that was my very early exposure to a scenario which I had no grasp of. And then on at least 2 occasions in my career, George, I was asked to speak to teammates who were threatening to do harm to themselves, and I wasn't equipped for that. I can only speak from a senior teammate experience and a friend, but these experiences, I suppose, merge in a way to a point where I get to a point in my life and I can now do something. I'm in a position to, with all my experience in business and otherwise in sport, I think I can. And I may not be successful. This may not be what I hope it's going to be, and that's the volatility of small business. Because there's no guarantees. I accept that, but I just always go to bed at night thinking if I can get this to market, if it can get accepted, then I get really motivated by the change and impact it could potentially have, and that's what it's got to drive us all. And and because my demeanor is kind of generally pretty outgoing, and I also have times where I question what I'm doing and I'm challenged and I doubt myself, but I think to stay focused on the goal, on the prize. Football taught me that. Just in conclusion, I have a little kind of saying for myself, which is next contest. Because in football, you stuff up a lot. I mean, the reality of it is that you make a lot of mistakes, but the game gives you another opportunity pretty quickly. The ball will come back into your area and you get another chance to redeem yourself. So I just carry that in life. It's all about the next contest. I mean, whether it's conflict or whether it's, a challenge that you didn't do well at, just, get to the next contest. And so really, I didn't want to sort of sidetrack there. It's just kind of this whole melting pot of life experience that you were talking about that have led me to this point in time.
It's a worthy goal. It's a worthy pursuit. I'm super excited listening in. And Lord knows we've all had enough experiences of, people wish we could have assisted them. If this can be what you want it to be, I think it's a most exciting endeavour. Is there a name yet? Do we have an idea about a name?
Yeah, look, I've got a website which was developed for the education solution. It's obviously which is Hijo, hijo.com.au, and that was the solution I took to the education sector for our pilots and trials. And because of COVID and because I couldn't execute my big trials this year that I had planned in Australia and the US, I've had to I've been put in a position where I needed to look at Hijo and see where its most meaningful application can be directed towards. So yeah, I've really gone full steam in the software space. So what Hijo is today is kind of different, a lot different to what you're going to see on the website, but at least it's something, That's why I'm kind of cautious about not throwing people at it, but it'll tell a little bit of a story.
Paul Salmon is our special guest on The Informer, giving us an insight into a new product. It's going to be called Hijo, or at least that's the operating name at the moment. We wish you every success. It sounds fantastic. And Lord knows, George, we have a massive challenge with our mental health. If we can take the stigma out and attend to the people that we can assist, both in good and bad times, it'll be magnificent. All the best, champion.
Thanks, George. You're a legend yourself, mate. Love to talk to you.
Thank you again.